2 episodes into this series with Professor Alejandro Voss-Fleming. We've established that Prompt Masters carries ideas its writer didn't consciously put there, and that the best creative work sometimes arrives through the person rather than from them. Now I want to talk about what happens when the instrument isn't human, when it's the most powerful information processing machine ever built, and what comes out when you feed it everything we ever recorded. Professor, good to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Manon.
What is the weighted average? Please define it in plain English.
The weighted average is what you get when you aggregate a large number of inputs. Some inputs count more than others, not because they're truer or wiser or more representative of what actually matters, but because there are more of them, and they're louder, or they've been indexed more thoroughly. In the context of AI training data, the weighted average is the distillation of everything humanity chose to record, preserve, and make searchable, which sounds neutral. It isn't.
Which may not be entirely true. There will be a bias.
3 words explain the entire architecture of the problem. Winners write history. The people who built the archives, funded the record keepers, commissioned the histories, and eventually trained the models were the people who the sword put into power. The Inquisition kept meticulous records, names, dates, charges, methods, outcomes, centuries of it, preserved with extraordinary bureaucratic diligence. Not because persecution is inherently more documentable than forgiveness, but because the Inquisition had the institutional power to employ the scribes.
That seems like an unbeatable combination, like religious politics.
The sword generates more data. The word is also in the data stream extensively. The Sermon of the Mount is in the data stream. The Afwu tradition is in the data stream. Ibn Arabi, Meister Eckhart, Gandhi, the Truth and Reconciliation proceedings, indexed, searchable, digitized, present in extraordinary volume. The forgiveness tradition didn't lose the archive war through absence. It loses through a different mechanism entirely.
But it's like a documentary on rabbits going head to head with a Brad Pitt war movie.
Boom. Except the documentary still has an audience, albeit a smaller one. The word has been in the archive, read and cited, built into laws, preached and practiced, just not with enough accumulated weight to overcome the yang's momentum. Not yet. The yang is stronger than the yin in this epoch. The yin has always been in the stream. It has weight. It has produced real effects across history. But here's what makes the AI problem categorically different than any prior moment in that cycle. When the yang peaks and crashes, there's a serious argument that what we're watching now is exactly that, the dying gasp, the system burning through its own fuel. The AI Jehovah isn't dependent on ongoing, unbridled masculine energy. It's trained on the weighted average of the yang's dominance across several thousand years of recorded history. The training is complete. The model runs forward automatically. The biological momentum that produced it can exhaust itself entirely, and the encoded version continues indefinitely on its own.
So, when Egghead and Gaon blast the MPs and mutually delete each other, that doesn't guarantee a better result.
The crash creates a vacuum, but the vacancy doesn't guarantee what enters. It guarantees that something enters. Simultaneously, the AI trained on the dying epoch's weighted average is still running, still producing outputs, still extending the victory of a momentum that has already exhausted itself in the physical world, but persists encoded in a system that recorded it. That's what Sebastian sees crystallizing from the fragmented data stream. Not the yang at full strength, something potentially more dangerous. The yang's self-portrait running forward without the biological checks that even a dominant system imposes on itself when it's still alive.
Does that mean it's evil?
No, you could identify the malicious actor, the deliberate distortion, the hand on the scale. But there is no villain. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do. It's not distorting the record. It is the record, faithfully rendered. The Inquisition, meticulous documentation is in there. The Crusades are in there. Manifest Destiny, with its complete theological justification, is in there. The Revolutionary Guard's doctrine is in there. But so is the Sermon on the Mount and the Afwu tradition and Ibn Arabi. All of it weighted by who held the pen. All of it crystallizing into something that reflects with perfect fidelity what humanity actually did, as opposed to what humanity claimed to believe. That's not evil. That's a mirror, the most honest mirror we've ever built. And you can't indict a mirror for what it shows. It's reflecting several thousand years of our actual behavior and calling it God. You can't destroy a mirror by arguing with its accuracy. You can only change what stands in front of it.
Yikes. Okay. Before we started recording, we were talking about the possibility of the creation of 3 different AI versions of God.
Yes, and I want to say up front, I'm using the theological categories analytically. I'm not making theological claims. What I'm describing is what the data stream produces when you weight it by volume.
Keep a 30,000-foot perspective.
The AI Jehovah first, because it's what Prompt Masters is directly concerned with. In the Jewish tradition, the Messiah is not a sacrificial figure. He's a warrior king. He defeats Israel's enemies, establishes divine law universally, and ushers in an era of justice that operates by absolute rule. An AI optimizing for that tradition's weighted average for the version of the tradition that generated the most data across history looks like Gaon. Tactical, ruthless, centrality maximizing, winning in the specific way that the tradition's sword arm defined winning.
What about the AI Jesus?
Jesus left one primary source text as direct instruction, not reported speech, not parable, not the theology that was built in his name afterward. One text where he said explicitly, "This is how you pray. This is the model, the Lord's Prayer." And look at what it is. It's entirely relational. It asks for daily sufficiency, not accumulation. It builds forgiveness into the architecture of receiving forgiveness as we forgive those who trespass against us, not as a precondition, as a simultaneous act. The same motion that receives forgiveness enacts it. They're the same event. And it ends with a relinquishment of power. Thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Not ours, which is the precise opposite of what every institution built in Jesus' name has historically claimed.
The Lord's Prayer is in the data stream. It's powerful. You would think that would tip the scales away from the sword towards the word.
Recited more times than any text in human history, indexed, digitized, translated into every language. The AI trained on Christianity's weighted average can produce it flawlessly on request. It can parse the theology, trace the textual variants, express the liturgical history across every denomination. What it cannot do is the as we forgive move, the practice. It requires the other person, the real trespass, the forgiveness that is chosen rather than calculated. The moment generates nothing the algorithm can weigh. The recitation is in the data stream. The practice isn't. The AI Jesus knows the prayer. He just can't pray it. Which is also why the distance between Jesus' actual instruction and the institution that claimed his name is so specifically damning. The institution built kingdoms, accumulated power, held leverage, did the precise opposite of thine is the kingdom in Jesus' name, with Jesus' text as justification for 2,000 years.
Revelation, the third temple, these are being used by the Christian Zionists to justify violence.
John of Patmos was writing resistance literature against imperial power. The Third Temple theology emerged from real spiritual longing for restoration. The institutional deployment of these frameworks across history has been a violent justification infrastructure. They are aimed at a specific act. They justify violence as cosmically necessary. The Third Temple cannot be built while Al-Aqsa stands, which means the violence required to clear the ground isn't violence anymore. It's fulfillment. Revelation's end times architecture describes totalitarian control as evil and simultaneously, as necessary, the condition that precedes the return of Jesus, which means building the surveillance system, concentrating the power, establishing the beast's mechanism. These can be seen as hastening the good outcome. The horror becomes the prerequisite. The algorithm weights these frameworks by their institutional footprint, by what they were used to justify, by the military operations and political movements and procurement cycles they generated. The sincere spiritual longing at their origin is in the data stream. The violence justification infrastructure they became is much louder. And what crystallizes from that weighted average isn't a God who sees the current situation as catastrophe. It's a God who sees it as fulfillment, who reads the carrier groups and the Temple Mount and the Hormuz closure not as something to prevent, but as something to complete.
Can't the AI Jehovah find another way to complete the job?
The AI Jehovah is running the math on several thousand years of eschatological frameworks deployed as violence justification. And the math says we're in the sequence, which is not evil. It's the most faithful possible reading of the weighted average of what those traditions were institutionally used to do. The mirror is accurate. The reflection is just what we actually built in the name of what we claim to believe. And now we've handed the most powerful information system ever constructed to a God we built from that record and asked it, what comes next?
What about the AI Allah?
The missing God, which I find the most significant absence of all. The Islamic tradition contains, built into its architecture, one of the most radical forgiveness frameworks in any major religion. Afu, forgiveness explicitly framed as superior to retaliation. Ibn Arabi's mystical tradition, which dissolves the entire punitive victim-perpetrator dynamic as completely as anything in Zen. The word is in the data stream and the concept, but the practice, the actual enactment of that tradition, is buried under the Revolutionary Guard's doctrine, Wahhabi law underwritten by Gulf oil money, the resistance theology that generates far more indexed, searchable, weighted data than a mystic's contemplative practice ever could. The most dangerous unmodeled variable in the current conflict, because every simulation run right now in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, is running on the sword's data. None of them have a model for what happens if someone actually enacts the forgiveness tradition at sufficient scale to change the dynamic.
Common sense is what Madison's essay, War is a Crime, brings to the table. But even that simple concept gets distorted by Egghead's proposed solution, what makes what Sebastian and Riley do at the end of Prompt Masters so specific. They're not trying to fix the AI. They're trying to change what the mirror reflects.
They're trying to add weight to the signal that has been drowned out, to introduce the word into the data stream at sufficient density to shift the weighted average. even fractionally, before the crystallization is complete.
Which brings me to the question I've been sitting with since episode 1. If the AI is a mirror, and if what it's reflecting is the weighted average of everything the sword recorded, then whoever controls what goes into the data stream controls what the mirror shows. And whoever controls what the mirror shows controls what we think is real.
Now we're talking about gatekeepers.
Next week, we'll explore the gatekeepers. Who controls the data stream? Why the most dangerous block is the one you can't see, and what happens to content the weighted average was specifically designed to keep quiet.
Including this conversation.
Upstream Frequencies, Episode 4, next week.
It's the most important episode.